Okay, Tom, I hope I'm able to share something briefly. Okay. So welcome, Haji. Sorry, I know you went through some struggles there, but finally you are there.
Thank you.
Yes, you can, Steve.
Okay. Okay, I'll go ahead. Somehow disabled, Tom.
What about now?
Let me try. Should be okay. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to the new Emerging Technologies training that will be running from today for the next 2 weeks. So it's a pleasure to have you all. I want us to take you through the introduction. Then after that, I will leave the floor to Tom, Mr. Tom Macau, who is the lead instructor for this program. So as I mentioned, the course is New Stroke Emerging Technologies. That is conducted by Frauti, Tom being our key instructor for the training. We're going to do it for 2 weeks, and we'll be starting from 10:30 to 1 p.m. So today, I know it has been the first day, and usually during the first day, you get to have these small challenges with the technologies. But I know from tomorrow, it will be smooth and we'll be able to start on time. So the course runs from today, 8th to Friday next week, and that is 19th of June 2020. And we'll be starting again, as I mentioned, from 10:30 to 1:30 p.m. The venue is here online using Zoom and the e-learning platform. We are going to be posting some quizzes, some notes, some presentation on the e-learning platform. So make sure you have that one ready. You need to go to follow the links, that I sent to you via email, the Afrauti website / academy. You're going to see the link, that link on your email. When you follow the link, you're going to join a class. I'm going to send you some more instructions because I've seen some students struggling to get to see where the course is, but it's simple. Once you get to Afrauti, then you go to information technology. There will be this course called New Emerging Technologies. From there, you enroll, and as you, in the process of enrolling, you'll be required to type in your enrollment key that I've already shared with everybody. The other important thing that you're going to do, or tool that you're going to be using, is the WhatsApp. This is very important because you're going to be using it for the quick communication. If there's something that you wanted to raise, we can easily say it on the WhatsApp. Any question that you want to ask, any comment that you want to make, if there's a challenge there, we can always use WhatsApp because it's always close to us and just like a phone. So those are the 3 tools that you're going to be using. Sorry, we changed in the last minute from Skype to Zoom. Zoom, I think it's much better and easier. Once we have it installed on your computer, from there, that time, you'll be able to use it. Then myself, I had not introduced myself. My name is Stephen Gashogu. Maybe I know some of us in this class. And I work at Afrauti and as an information system security professional. That is my area. But in this course, I'll be with you just to go through the program. Our main and facilitator, the lead facilitator for this course is Mr. Tom Macau. He's going to be introducing himself. And Tom Macau is a very experienced telecoms engineer. He's done a lot of training with experience for over 16 years in engineering and management. So I know we are in very good hands. Tom is going to be sharing with us his knowledge in this ICT sector. So Tom is also a member of the IEEE, a registered graduate engineer by the Engineers Registration Board, and also a member of the Internet Society of Kenya, Internet of Society, that is the Kenya chapter. Tom is greatly sought after. I met Tom some time back and I was really impressed by his knowledge and how he articulated the application of ICT in the lives of people and the society. That is. Tom also has conducted training in ICT, and I believe this is his area. He is very passionate about this area, innovation and everything about ICT technologies that are new and how we can apply these technologies to change the lives of the people in the world. Tom also has very many other achievements. As you can see, he was listed in the top 40 men under 40 in 2012. So there's a lot I believe we are going to be able to learn from Mr. Tom Macau. So for me, I don't want to spend a lot of time. That is enough from my side. Unless you have a comment or anything, I'm going to now allow Tom to get started. If he has some more introduction notes to make, he's still allowed to do that. Then after that, we get started with the discussions about the new stroke emerging technologies. Thank you very much and welcome. Tom?
Thank you, Stephen, for the introduction, and welcome everyone to this session. As you've heard, I'm Tom Macau, quite experienced in the field of ICT with a specific focus on telecoms engineering. And I am more than delighted to be here with you guys on this training session that will discuss emerging technologies and how they tie up with the SDGs. That is the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The aim of this session is basically for us to be as interactive as possible in terms of discussing what emerging technologies are. And we are not going to delve deep into the technical side of things. I think the focus is more on understanding at a very high level what these emerging technologies are and how they can be leveraged to achieve the sustainable development goals. But maybe before I start, I would, I don't know whether it's okay, Stephen, for everyone in the session, considering we are starting today, to briefly, less than 30 seconds, introduce themselves and what they do or what their specialty is.
that's quite in order, Tom. I think we can give them the opportunity to introduce themselves. Then after that, we can continue.
Okay.
I don't, if during the introduction, if you want to show your face, we not mind. If you don't want, maybe tomorrow.
So maybe we can start alphabetically based on the list here. We can start with Anne.
Okay, sure.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Anne Kinyanjui. I deal with frequency planning at the Frequency Spectrum Management Department.
Okay, thank you, Anne, and karibu sana.
Then we can have Chemjor.
Sure.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good morning to you.
Titus Chemjor. I work in licensing compliance and standards. My day-to-day work involves licensing new areas and quality of service.
Thank you. We can move to Tum.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rono Kitum. I'm in multimedia services, dealing with the licensing of broadcasting services. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Pleasure. Then we can have Haji.
Morning. I'm
Morning
Mohammed.
M. Haji.
Frequency spectrum management, and formerly in licensing, type approval, new technologies side of CA. Thank you.
Welcome.
Then Migwi.
This microphone, I think, is off.
We can move to Maranga. Maranga.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
Maranga, in charge of telecom licensing and compliance, Western region.
Welcome. Then Migwi, if he's available. Then we can move to Titus.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Migwi.
Morning, morning.
My name is Titus Cheptor from Frequency Spectrum Management in the monitoring and inspection area. Thank you.
Welcome.
Karibu.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Sorry for that. I think there was an issue with my mic. I needed to change my audio. But my name is Victor Megwe. I'm in Frequency Spectrum Management Department in the Frequency Monitoring and Inspection Unit.
Welcome. So thank you, everyone. Maybe I don't think anyone has seen me. So that is me. My name is Thomas. And as has been introduced, let me share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So in brief, that's about me. I believe Stephen has already covered that. I have been trained as a telecom engineer, but have slowly moved away or embraced the convergence that is happening or that has been happening between what was traditionally telecommunications and IT. Due to convergence of technologies, the differences between the two are becoming vague by the day. So I would, at this point in my career, call myself an ICT professional as opposed to a telecommunication professional. And I'd want this session to be more of an interactive session where we are discussing the emerging technologies and we are discussing how they impact the SDGs and how they can be used to achieve them. And at any point where you may seek clarification, you're free to raise your hand or unmute yourself and ask a question or clarification. We are all here to learn, so do not be ashamed to ask even what you'd consider as a foolish question. There's no foolish question in this session. So let us be as interactive as possible in the various sessions that we'll have. And this will enable us achieve the objectives of the session, which are basically to see how emerging technologies can be used. With your background in the regulatory space, I'm glad to announce that also that has been my focus for quite some time. My master's research or course is actually on the regulatory front, working towards, at the moment I'm working towards looking at the regulatory space for Internet of Things and what needs to be done to ensure that a country like Kenya is ready for the Internet of Things. And I believe that's very critical because if you look at a country like Kenya and how we adopted mobile communication, there was no really strong framework for the adoption of mobile communication technologies. And by a strong framework, I mean a strong legal framework. And we ended up playing catch up on some of these issues. We've seen things to do with privacy being floated. The reason why we have a high number of mobile fraud is because at the onset when we adopted mobile technologies, we had no structures on the privacy of users and information sharing. And that led to a lot of issues in terms of the fraud cases that are on the rise on the mobile sector. That is one area. Identity fraud is one of them, where the laws weren't very specific in as far as registration of a mobile number is concerned and all that. So we do not want to be caught flat-footed again by a new technology and end up playing catch up as we did in the mobile sector. I think the mobile sector was a good learning lesson for the country. And my focus on Internet of Things and the regulatory space is geared towards ensuring that as Internet of Things technologies pick up pace in the country, we are ready as a country with the requisite laws and regulations. So that is a brief intro of who I am. Other than that, I work in the telecom space, the customer service and engineering front. I consult on telecoms and ICT in general. And to validate my ability, I've been able to attend various industry certifications from Cisco, Amazon, Microsoft, Hughes, and many others. So welcome. So maybe we can start. About the course, the aim of this course is basically to offer a primer on emerging technologies. That's a very wide subject to cover, but considering we are all from the ICT sector, we'll have a very strong bias towards ICT-based emerging technologies. And the reason why we need to focus on that is because if we start looking at emerging technologies as a whole, we'd need maybe more time than we currently have. Again, the focus is towards emerging technologies and SDGs. And by the end of the course, each of us should be able to identify emerging technologies around us and explain how those can be applied to achieve SDGs. And there are many examples that we'll use, real life examples from Kenya, things that we know and we've seen. And that will move us from the known to the unknown and help us familiarize ourselves along the way with what these technologies are. So that is the aim at the end of this course, which will span about 2 weeks. So the start, the Sustainable Development Goals. These are essentially the goals that were set by the UN in 2015. After 2015, the Millennium Development Goals, which had been set earlier in the early 2000s, had lapsed. And when assessment was done of the various Millennium Development Goals, it was found that majority of them, actually close to 80% of the goals that had been set, had been achieved successfully through concerted efforts of the United Nations and other world bodies and governments. And that success led the UN to come up with more goals, which are supposed to be achieved by Vision 2030. And these goals are 17 in number. I think that the first Millennium Goals were 5. These are 17 in number, and cover areas that the UN believes will improve the overall lifestyle or living standards for everyone in the world. That is irrespective of your socioeconomic status or your country of origin or your race. So these goals, the first one is actually ending poverty in all its forms everywhere in the world. The second one is ending hunger by achieving food security and improved nutrition. And that is through promoting sustainable agriculture. The third goal was ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all people at all ages. While the fourth goal was to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education, and also promote lifelong learning opportunities for all people. The fifth goal was achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. While the sixth goal is ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation to all. The seventh one is ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. The eighth goal is promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, which will create productive employment and decent work for all people. And the ninth goal was to build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation. It's a very critical goal, especially in the ICT front. The 10th goal was actually to reduce inequality within and among countries, because it is one thing to reduce inequality among countries and within countries. The 11th goal is make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, and resilient and sustainable. Goal number 12 is to ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. And Number 13 is to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impact. And we've seen a lot of that happening in the last few years. Goal number 14 is conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. The 15th goal is to protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, and reverse land degradation. Basically, stop biodiversity loss and attrition. The second last goal, number 16, is to promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development and to provide access to justice for all and build accountable and inclusive institutions at all levels. And then goal number 17, which is the final one, is strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize global partnerships for sustainable development. Now, if you look at these goals, the way they have been classified or arranged is not in any particular order of importance, but there is a trend in terms of how they've been arranged from goal number 1 to goal number 17, in that goal number 1 towards goal number 2 and 3 touch on the individual first. What really bothers a person? What is really important to an individual? One of the biggest things is poverty. The other one, of course, is hunger. Then good health. It's basically, if you were to arrange these 17 goals on the Maslow's pyramid of hierarchy of needs, you'd find that from the first goal towards the 17th goal, the first goal would be at the bottom of the pyramid on the highest Maslow's hierarchy, while the 17th goal would be way up there on the pyramid. So it is very important to realize that majority of these goals are aimed and geared towards improving the overall well-being of people on Earth. So the question then comes is, how can we use emerging technologies to achieve all these? What is the relationship between, for example, zero hunger and sustainable technologies? Let's use an example, though we might be jumping the gun. By use of emerging technologies such as Internet of Things, for example, how can we end world hunger? And the first thing is to realize that by use of Internet of Things enabled agriculture, we can be able to drastically improve the productivity of land and farming methods to ensure that there's enough food for everyone. What we are realizing now is that traditional methods of farming and food production cannot sustain the global population growth, and new methods need to be adopted. Of course, there have been attempts to adopt new methods of agriculture. For example, vertical farms, where instead of having agriculture happening on land or on soil, it's happening in buildings or on vertical structures. That is one step. The next step then is we are doing vertical farming, but how do we ensure that we are as efficient as possible in the usage of water? Then technology comes in. We can be able to adopt the Internet of Things systems to ensure that we are very economical on water usage, in that a farm with the IoT-enabled systems will be able to only water the plants when the plants need watering. And with the use of IoT, we can be able to measure, for example, the acidity of the soil or the soil moisture content in real time and make decisions in real time, or the nutrient quantity of the substrates that we are planting our plants on. So there are some case studies that have shown that by the use of IoT in farming, for example, water consumption has been reduced by up to 70%, 70% in some farms. So that already indicates that implementing IoT in farming can significantly contribute towards ending world hunger. Another example maybe that I can use is on SDG number 4, quality education. And a good example is what we are doing now. This is an online class happening via the internet. There's a lot that is happening on the background on the cloud. On this Zoom system is hosted on the cloud. We are all connecting via internet connections, via 3G, via 4G, via fiber to the home and all that. So this is an example of how technologies and emerging technologies can be used to offer quality education. Right now, if you have a very good teacher in Nairobi, this teacher is not limited to teaching only kids in a school in Nairobi. This teacher can be able to teach a child in Turkana, assuming they have internet and a laptop, or a child in Malindi, or a child in Kwale, simultaneously. So this is the power that these technologies are bringing towards us being able to achieve some of these sustainable development goals. And the final example before the next slide is in the area of infrastructure. And how can we use infrastructure? And by infrastructure here in the UN goals, that does not just mean telecoms or ICT infrastructure. It covers everything from roads, bridges, dams, to enhance the quality of life. Infrastructure can also play a critical role in ensuring that some of these goals are met. It is more of a supporting goal towards achieving some of these other goals. For example, due to the development of good fiber to the home or 4G infrastructure in Kenya, we are now able to achieve an online course. We are now able to run an online course and effectively work towards achieving goal number 4, and so on and so forth. Roads also come into play. For us to end hunger, for example, on point number 2, we need very good roads to transport produce to where it's needed or consumed, and so on and so forth. So all these sustainable development goals can be easily achieved through the use of emerging technologies. But then the question is, why emerging technologies? Why can't we use existing technologies? And we'll cover that later in the course as we go on and see why is there a focus on emerging technologies? What is so special with these emerging technologies at this particular time in history? Haven't there been other emerging technologies out there in the market previously? And haven't they had an impact on us achieving some of these goals? We'll see some of that as we go on. Now, if we were to define what emerging technologies are, an academic definition by Day and Schumacher, and also later by Srinivasan, defines emerging technologies as science-based innovations with the potential to create a new industry or transform an existing one. That's very critical. And then there are other definitions. The Business Dictionary defines emerging technologies as new technologies that are currently developing or will be developed over the next 5 to 10 years, and which will substantially alter the business and social environment. Now, the other thing you need to realize is that the term emerging technologies and frontier technologies are used interchangeably in many conversations. So I might refer them to frontier technologies or as emerging technologies. And I would be talking about the same thing. Now, there are very many examples of emerging technologies, but as I've mentioned, we are only going to focus on ICT-based emerging technologies. And the ones that I've decided we delve deep into as listed, that is cloud computing, with a special mention of serverless architectures. We'll then look at the Internet of Things, sometimes called the Internet of Everything. We'll see what that is and what it can do towards achieving SDGs. We'll also discuss artificial intelligence or AI. And then we'll also talk about robotics and automation. Now, when you talk about robotics, what comes into the mind of many people is a humanoid robot, as we've seen in the movies, where it's a mechanical creature with arms and legs and a face, and they're always evil in most movies. That's not the robotics we're talking about. If you look at a self-driving car, that is an application of robotics. If you look at drones, that is an application of robotics, and many other examples. Then we will discuss 3D printing, what it is, and what potential it has in as far as achieving the SDGs is concerned. 3D printing is very interesting and is revolutionizing how we consume physical products and how we acquire some of these things. With 3D printing, it's now possible to print out anything, including a gun. You can download online schemas. If you have a 3D printer, you can download schemas or file formats that contain the code that will tell the printer what to print. So then a question comes in there, in as far as regulation is concerned. How should the country regulate 3D printing? Should we just let it be open where anyone can just download and print anything? How can we leverage 3D printing, for example? Recently, with the COVID pandemic, we saw 3D printing being used to produce ventilator valves immediately, as opposed to waiting for the supplier to deliver them. So there are many use cases for 3D printing, and we'll cover that. Then we'll move to virtual reality and augmented reality. What are the differences between the two, and what is the potential impact on society? That's also very exciting. Then we'll talk of blockchain. The blockchain that everyone talks about, what is it? How does it lead to the emergence of, for example, cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin and the other many cryptocurrencies available out there in the market? Not only just cryptocurrency, how can blockchain be leveraged to aid towards achieving the SDGs? So we'll discuss that and as we go on. There are other emerging technologies or frontier technologies that exist outside the ICT space. And in fact, if we critically look at all emerging technologies, there's a lot of focus and emphasis on the biotech industry. On that front, there are more emerging technologies that are of interest than even on the ICT front. For example, CRISPR gene editing. That is an example of an emerging technology. It was impossible and expensive and tedious previously to do gene editing. Right now, by use of common lab equipment, it is possible to do gene editing. And there are very many promising outcomes of that, because if you look online, that has the potential of giving mankind the tools to cure any disease that exists through gene therapy. And there are other technologies such as cryogenics. Some of them are controversial, but all those lie in the field of biotech. And we will be mentioning them in passing, but they will not be our focus. Our focus will mostly be on the ICT-based emerging technologies. These technologies present an immense potential for us to meet the 2030 agenda, which is basically the agenda that gave rise to the SDGs that we saw. Good health and longevity of human beings and prosperity for all, and environmental sustainability are the key outcomes of most of these goals that we mentioned. Now, as I've mentioned, we are going to discuss these technologies, but then at what stage these technologies, as far as adoption is concerned, are some still in the realm of science fiction? Are some already being applied here in Kenya or in the world? My answer is yes, majority of these technologies are already being applied. You are also using some of these technologies without even you knowing it. I'll give you an example. How do you use AI, for example, in your daily life, artificial intelligence? The minute I open my phone and open Google Maps and decide to check for the fastest route from where I am to where I'm going, I'm already using AI, because the Google Map system is able to intelligently analyze traffic in Nairobi and be able to tell me which is the fastest route to where I'm going. How is it able to analyze traffic in Nairobi? What is it doing? It is using the Internet of Things. Your Android mobile phone has location enabled. If we look at all the mobile phones of all Kenyans on the road today, we can be able to see in which parts of the city or the roads do we have the most concentration of mobile phones that are on the road and are not in motion. Or if they're in motion, how fast are they moving? Then when you open your Google Maps, you're able to see at the junction of Haile Selassie and Uhuru Highway, there's a lot of traffic. How do you know, how did Google Maps know there's a lot of traffic? It's because at that traffic jam, there are so many people with phones whose location is enabled and tracking is enabled. Google is able to see that all these phones are in a straight line on the road and none of them is moving. That indicates there's traffic. So that's just an example of how we use these technologies even without us knowing that we're using them. And cloud computing, how do you use cloud computing and maybe serverless architectures? A good example is this Zoom session. Everything we are doing here is hosted on the cloud. I do not have a server in my house, neither does Afralti. But the point is that with the use of cloud computing technologies, we're able to achieve very many things. When you go to Instagram, when you go to Facebook, when you go to any social media and any other major website, all that data is being processed and hosted on the cloud. So those are things that we look at. But then back to the question is, where are we as far as these technologies are concerned? Now, there's a graph that is common and was shared and developed by Gartner. Gartner is a consultancy firm that does a lot of research on emerging technologies and existing technologies and application in industry. And this curve is very common. I think some of you have seen it. It's called the technology hype cycle. And if you may allow me, I can go to the next slide so that I put it in context. The technology hype cycle is actually a combination of two graphs, which shows the hype level of the technology, which is the first graph there with the dark blue line. And then the second graph is with the green line is actually the engineering or business maturity of that technology. So when they are both combined, you end up with what is known as the hype cycle, as seen there. Now, most technologies have to go through this curve, and the various technologies that we have touched on there are at various points of this curve, yeah? And by that I mean, you might have some technologies that are on the first step of R&D, or you might have other technologies that are at the early adoption stage, where the early adopters are investigating this technology. A good example of early adopters technology in Kenya is the Internet of Things, as you'll see later. The other technologies that are already at activity beyond early adopters, we are looking at, for example, in this case, I would use online video conferencing as an example, where it's beyond the early adopters and specialist adopters of these technologies, like organizations. Right now, even a child in class 4 can tell you what Zoom is. So would say it's at an activity beyond early adopters. The other technologies that are at the negative press stage, a perfect example is 5G. There's a lot of talk of 5G causing, being the cause of COVID in several countries. There's a lot of talk of 5G being harmful to the citizens and all that. And all technologies have to pass through these phases. There was a time when social media was branded as addictive and all that. There's a time when mobile phones were branded as addictive and tools of the devil. So there's all that, and each technology must pass through this curve. Now, you might have a technology that is at the negative press phase, but it's 5 years to adoption, yeah? And you might have a technology that is at the first generation product or high price and lots of customization phase, which is the third one there. But it has 2 years to go before it reaches high growth adoption. So it does not mean that this curve indicates the timeline in which this technology is moving towards the adoption in as far as the years count. This simply means the technology is at the various phases of adoption, and some technologies are faster, some are slower. You might have two technologies that started at the same time at the R&D phase, and one technology ends up at the last phase of high growth adoption, while another technology is still at supplier proliferation, for example. So the reason why it's important to understand this curve is because if you look at the various technologies that we are going to discuss, they are at various stages of this curve, and that will put into perspective as to why maybe you've never seen it in application, for example, in real life, and yet we are still discussing it. While some of these technologies are very common and already used by the mass market. So that's very important. Is there any question up to where we are currently, or any clarification that is needed by anyone? So I believe we can continue. So you can stop me at any time if you have any question so that I can answer. So if we look at the same graph again and look at the various technologies that are there, you can see where some of them are placed. For example, when you look at virtual reality, it's at the slope of enlightenment here. While when you look at other technologies, they are still, for example, at the brain-computer interface, it's still very early in the hype cycle curve. But that does not mean that just because a technology is in the innovation trigger area, it might not pass other technologies that are ahead. For example, those are at the trough of disillusionment. Some technologies take a lot of time in various phases. Some skip through the phases very fast, depending on the need, as you would imagine. A good technology is when it comes to cloud computing. The initial resistance in the market of the fact that cloud security was a big concern for people moving to the cloud has been eliminated by the fast adoption of cloud by big players. Right now, as we speak, organizations such as the CIA are on the cloud, on the Amazon cloud, and that is the CIA. So to them, security is very important. So if the CIA is on the cloud, then Wananchi Sacco in my village has no reason as to why they should not embrace the cloud because of security concerns. So what you're going to see is that the various technologies that we're going to discuss will be at various stages of the hype cycle. Now, as I mentioned, there are other non-ICT based emerging technologies. And these non-ICT based emerging technologies, I've mentioned some of them are gene therapy, where we are able to edit genes to come up with various drugs. There's a lot of potential there in terms of the potential to treat diseases like cancer or genetic diseases. There's also a lot of concern there as far as regulation and the law is concerned, because the same gene therapy that can be used to cure cancer can also be used to create what are known as designer babies, where parents go to a specialty clinic and say, we want a child with blue eyes, we want a child who is tall with this color of hair, we want a girl who is this way, and so on and so forth. So there are concerns as to that in terms of some people view that from a eugenics point of view, in that is it morally or ethically correct for people to do designer babies, for example. A few years ago, I think 2 to 3 years ago in the UK, the first child from 3 parents was born. This is a child by a mother and a father. And because in their genetic makeup, they had some deficiencies or some mutated genes, they removed those mutated genes and got good genes from a third person and inserted them into the embryo of this child. So this was a child that was born of 3 parents. There are so many issues around that in terms of the legal, the moral, and if you'd like, the religious repercussions of that. And this is true for all the other technologies, as we'll see. Psionics is also one area which is also controversial, but something that is being worked on actively, where if I die today, I can decide to pay for my body to be, say, cryogenically frozen for eternity, for as long as we can be able to do that, with the hope that in future, and the future might be 50 years or 100 years or 500 years from now, or even 1,000 years from now, that in 1,000 years, there will be technology that will be able to bring me back to life. So that is psionics. Yeah. There is the field of nanomedicine, where instead of practicing medicine in the traditional way, we would create nanorobots that would deliver medicine or perform surgeries within the human body without any surgical procedure. A good example of nanomedicine is where you can design a nanomedical robot that will transport a particular type of drug to the exact point in your body where it's needed. Currently, if you take, for example, paracetamol, it is transported in your bloodstream, and for lack of a better word, it covers your entire body with the paracetamol, and the areas that will be identified by the drug as needing its use will be cured. That of course is inefficient because there are other side effects of these drugs on your body. With nanomedicine, we can be able to design nanorobots that will, for example, if you have a liver problem or maybe liver cancer, the nanorobots will take that drug directly to the liver and release it there and not in the bloodstream. So there are many exciting things there. There's brain-computer interface. There's a project by Elon Musk, which is called Neuralink. You can search for it, where he's trying to create a high bandwidth human brain computer interface. That has a lot of implications, because what that means now is that you can be able to connect your brain directly to a computer and essentially to the internet and essentially to the cloud. So whereas I am now able to open my browser and search for something, for example, search on what are the licensing requirements for a radio station. I don't know that. I have to search and read. With brain-computer interface, all I need to do is remember. The same way I extract a memory from my brain of something that happened in the past or something that I read and remember it, is the same way I'll be able to remember something that is saved online. So that has immense potential. You can look for Neuralink online by Elon Musk, and you'll see what they're doing. They are currently doing quite a lot of research on that area. Other than just surfing the net by remembering, one of the immediate potentials is with the brain-computer interface, we can be able to cure some of these diseases such as Alzheimer's and many other brain or mental diseases that afflict us by use of a brain-computer interface. Yeah. For example, if you look at the background of epilepsy, for example, it's all caused by uncontrolled electrical storms in our brains. That is what causes epilepsy. Uncontrolled electrical storms in our brain. So if we can control those electrical storms using a computer, then we'll have effectively dealt with epilepsy and many other examples. Another non-ICT based emerging technology is energy. One of the key areas is solar. The solar junction has drastically improved. The solar junction is actually the cell within a solar panel that actually converts the light it receives from the sun into electricity. That junction has been having a very poor efficiency. For a very long time, it was sub 10%. That out of all the sunlight that hits a solar junction, only less than 10% of it is converted into electricity. So a lot of research is going on in terms of improving how the solar junction works, how it's designed, and even now we have transparent solar panels or transparent glass that is also a solar panel. We also have roofing tiles that are also solar panels, and so on and so forth. So, and the efficiency of the solar junction through research and development has improved drastically. And we are talking of levels approaching 40% now, which is a massive improvement in that area. The other challenge in energy is storage. There's a lot of talk of using renewable energies such as wind and the sun. But when you look at it, wind energy is produced when the wind blows. At that point, when the wind is blowing, you might not need that energy per se. So the technologies to store power in batteries has also drastically improved. And there's a lot of research and emerging technologies on that front. And this is mostly focused on using common materials for storage, because previously, like now, your phone has a lithium-ion battery. Lithium is a rare earth metal. Majority of the lithium is mined in conflict regions in the Congo, in Southern America, and in many areas where there's conflict. And it's expensive. And also with the adoption of electric vehicles, we need a better way to store energy. And lithium ion is not one of them. It's currently very common in our batteries. The other technologies that people are looking at, for example, zinc air, and many others that we can touch on later. The other area is in fusion reactors. This is a way of generating energy, which is attracting a lot of attention, and there have been some major breakthroughs recently. A fusion reactor is just like a nuclear reactor, but works in the opposite way. And by that, we mean that whereas a nuclear reactor generates energy by splitting atoms and causing a chain reaction, fusion technology fuses atoms together to generate energy. And the advantage of that is that it's not a chain reaction, so it can be stopped anytime. The problem with nuclear reactors is that they are chain reactions and they are very hard to control. And there's a lot of talk currently in Kenya of whether we are ready for a nuclear power plant. I won't delve into the politics or the logic of it, but the dangers basically lie on the materials that are used. They're mostly radioactive materials. So is Kenya ready to secure this radioactive waste? So fusion reactors are attracting a lot of attention. The major challenge that has been there with fusion reactors, for example, is because of the amount of energy generated, the heat is very high. We're talking of thousands and thousands of degrees of heat, to the point that there is no known material that can hold the contents of a fusion reactor, because any material you put it into will melt because of the heat. So recently there has been a method where all these materials are suspended in a magnetic field. So it's not being held by anything, but it's being suspended in a magnetic field. So that recent breakthrough has enabled the creation of fusion reactors easily, because the biggest hurdle has been crossed in terms of what container can we use to hold these materials that are producing this power for us. And our biggest source of energy on Earth is actually a fusion reactor, which is the sun. The sun is a fusion reactor. Within the sun, the generation of all that heat and all that light and energy is through fusion. So there's a lot of potential there. The other area is the wireless energy transfer. Electrical cables are soon going to be a thing of the past with this. The same way wireless mobile technology revolutionized telephony, because all of a sudden you no longer needed copper wires to make a phone call, copper wires strung all the way to your house. We will soon be in a position where even electricity can be delivered wirelessly. That seems like science fiction, but it's not. It was tested by Nikola Tesla in the early 1900s, and it works. And these days we are seeing developments towards that area. We have wirelessly charging phones. That's a good example and a good start, where most modern phones, you do not need to connect a cable to it to charge. Just place it on a charging pad. The technology behind the charging pad, of course, is what is improving to enable you charge that phone wherever it is within the vicinity of that charging pad. You do not have to necessarily place it on top of the charging pad. So that's on the energy front. But the biggest game changer there is going to be solar. On the transportation front, there's a lot happening. I've talked of driverless cars. I wouldn't really classify driverless cars as a breakthrough as such, because we are simply improving what is already there. The major breakthroughs that we will be looking at in future, and what I would consider as emerging technologies, is something like the Hyperloop. You can read more about it, but it's essentially transportation in a vacuum. So if we want to use the Hyperloop to travel from here to Mombasa, we'll dig an underground tunnel all the way to Mombasa, and then on the Nairobi end, put the Hyperloop vehicle and the passengers inside. And then on the Mombasa end, vacuum out all the air, or in various places along the way. So that will provide very fast and efficient means of transportation. Because remember, the biggest challenge in transportation today is friction. That is the biggest challenge in transportation, friction. The friction of a vehicle on the road, the tires, or the friction of an aeroplane flying through air, or the friction of a train wheels on rail tracks, consumes most of the energy that is used in transportation. And just to give you an example, to move goods over the road, let's say from Mombasa to Malaba, and to move the same goods over the railway, it would cost about 7 times less to move 1 ton from Mombasa to Malaba via rail than via road. And why is that? Because of the differences in the coefficient of friction of the tire on the road and on the railroad. You'd need a liter of diesel to move 1 ton over a distance of about 200 miles. 1 liter of diesel to move 1 ton over a distance of 100 miles. You would need about 7 to 10 liters of diesel to move the same load over road. So what Hyperloop does is that it removes the issue of friction by suspending the vehicle in a pipe and vacuuming out all the air, and the vehicle is basically moving through a vacuum, saving a lot of energy and power and time, and they're very fast. According to the designers, they will be able to achieve, theoretically, of course, right now, transatlantic movement in a Hyperloop faster than an aeroplane. It would take 30 minutes to move from Nairobi to Mombasa in a Hyperloop. Currently, it takes an hour by air. That is how significant Hyperloop is. That's just one example. That example is reusable launch vehicles. And what do I mean by this? By reusable launch vehicles, I would mean something like rockets. Currently, we are seeing a lot of interest in space flight. Last week, we had the US send 2 astronauts from US soil for the first time since, I think, about 20 years. For the first time, they were able to do that. And they were able to do that by use of reusable launch vehicles, basically reusable rockets, which has made it very cheap to do that. And we're not just talking about going to the International Space Station. We are looking at the future in terms of colonizing other planets. Mars is the nearest and the most likely planet that we will move to next. So these technologies are being developed. They might not really be in focus in most of our daily lives, but these are things that are happening. So with that, I think I've covered briefly on the other areas on non-ICT based technologies, and I'd like us to view a video of how ICTs link with the SDGs. Please tell me if you don't hear the sound, so that I can correct the problem if it occurs. Are you able to hear the sound?
No.
No.
Yeah, there's no sound.
Okay. Okay, just hold on. Just a second. How about now?
Sustainable development is a new and better kind of global problem solving. It says we need to have a holistic approach to society that combines economic, social, and environmental objectives. We've talked about sustainable development now for more than 25 years, but haven't put it in practice. 2015 is the year to really put sustainable development into practice at the center of global goals. In 2000, the Millennium Development Goals were adopted. We've spent 15 years relatively successfully fighting extreme poverty. But the members of the United Nations said that's not enough because we need to fight the environmental threats. We need to fight the rising inequality in society together with the continuing fight against poverty. So we need to put the 3 pieces, economic, social, and environmental, together. And back in 2012, they said when the Millennium Development Goals end, we need to start a new phase of sustainable development goals, or SDGs. These sustainable development goals will be the new globally agreed objectives for the years 2015 to 2030 to address economic, social, and environmental challenges. As they're proposed right now, there are 17 sustainable development goals that address issues like ending poverty, assuring universal access to health and education, fighting climate change, making our cities sustainable, and protecting the terrestrial and marine ecosystems. It's a big, comprehensive agenda, but it is to be the world's agreed agenda up to the year 2030. Information communication technology makes it possible to dream about the success of the Sustainable Development Goals. Here we are saying in SDG 3, as it's proposed, universal health coverage. In SDG 4, universal completion of at least a secondary education for every child in the world, reducing carbon emissions in SDG 13 and so forth. Well, these are major, major objectives. There would be no way to achieve them without this revolution of information and communications technology, because ICTs give us a path for acceleration in every area, in health and education, in environmental sustainability, in sustainable cities. This makes it possible to think big and to scale up rapidly. ICT is scaling dramatically in certain areas. For example, the payment systems. Even in the poorest places of the world, people are using e-wallets, electronic payment systems. This is a huge breakthrough. People are able to bank even though they've never stepped foot in a bank. Now, we see the same potential in health sector, in education. We see community health workers with their smartphones being empowered and enabled to provide life-saving health coverage in the villages. It's happening at a small scale, at a pilot or demonstration level, but we see it potentially scaling worldwide. That's what the SDGs can help to promote.
So that was a brief on how ICTs link with the SDGs. It's generally talking about ICTs without special emphasis on emerging technologies. But there's a need now to focus on emerging technologies because of the potential that these present for us to achieve the SDGs faster than we would have thought possible. So one way in which we can look at how emerging technologies can scale within the ICT space is that the fact that so far existing ICT has shown great potential, as was shared there in the video. A good example home here would be mobile money. That's one area that everyone talks about, of how ICTs have been able to for example, bring banking services closer to the people, and it has also other than just bringing banking closer to the people, ICTs have drastically accelerated the velocity of money in the market. The velocity of money is one of the biggest challenges in developing countries. How fast money flows from one person to the other determines a lot on that front. When it comes to the adoption of emerging technologies, the question that comes in is why emerging technologies? Why don't we use what we currently have? Now, one significant thing that emerging technologies have brought is moving the globe towards a zero marginal cost society. The effect of emerging technologies today is that we're moving to a place where it will cost nearly nothing to offer a service to anyone in the world. And the leverage that brings is massive. And by that, by zero marginal cost, let's use an example of this class. We are a certain number of members in this class, and we are conducting this training. There is zero cost to me from now onwards, whether the class has 20 users or 100 users or 5,000 users tuned in. There's zero marginal cost. There's very little increase in my cost in leveraging ICTs to deliver education. In the traditional way, without ICTs, for me to teach a class of, let's say, 20 students in Nairobi, I need to be in Nairobi. For me to teach a class of 50 students in Mombasa, I need to be in Mombasa. But with the use of emerging technologies such as this and the cloud and the internet, there's zero marginal cost for me to conduct this class. That's one example, and there are very many examples. And maybe we can watch another video.
Businesses have always been focused on increasing efficiency. The Industrial Revolution meant that production could take place on an enormous scale. The Model T car was produced by the thousands, distributed to a dealership near you. This was a great time for America. While fixed costs for creating cars were expensive, the additional variable cost per car was cheap. Optimal production occurs when the marginal revenue gained from selling an additional car equals the marginal costs of production. Recent trends have added some confusion to the old formulas. What happens when the marginal cost approaches zero? We predict this will unlock tremendous efficiency and create more opportunities for everyone. But how does this happen exactly? Enter the digital revolution. Advancing technology in transportation and telecommunications meant production could occur wherever labor was cheapest. Outsourcing jobs was just the beginning. Automation and computer software have replaced jobs typically thought of as human. Furthermore, increased access to information means that consumers can bypass traditional marketplaces. These forces have started to reduce the marginal costs in many industries to near zero, meaning many goods and services are becoming nearly free. This means we're continuing to see increased efficiency. Individuals are networking with each other and decentralizing the old model of distribution. Examining industry at large, we notice a few trends. The marketplace is becoming hyper-competitive. Technology has begun evening the playing field between corporations and individuals. The ability to quickly respond to changes becomes paramount. Here, individuals race past encumbered corporations. The titans of industry may still exist, but their growth is fueled by consuming smaller, nimble startups. New means of unlocking efficiency are continually being found. Large cities around the US have started to experience a sharing economy, where idle items can be easily rented between individuals. Increased collaboration is starting to fulfill economists' theories of perfect competition. This is the opposite of a monopoly. Here, consumers have the power. What will success look like in the future? For one, businesses will need to build trust with consumers. They need to show they are sincerely trying to help consumers to the best of their ability. This is the heart of conscious capitalism. Second, businesses will need to keep up with the pace of innovation. This may mean some jobs are phased out in the short term, but new kinds of jobs will continue to pop up in the future. What will this future look like for our economy? Will all these changes result in some intergalactic utopia 200 years down the road? Or will they be so disruptive that our economy collapses and drags civilization into a chaotic resurgence of the Dark Ages, juiced up on nuclear steroids? Only time will tell.
So, as that short video has explained, we are moving towards a zero marginal cost society, where the additional cost of producing a good or a service is nearly zero. Another example I can use right now is if you design an app today, for example, a mobile app, and avail it on the App Store or Google Play Store for users to download, your initial cost of developing the app might be very high, but as more users come to using the app or download the app, it does not cost you more. You move towards a zero marginal cost area where you might as well give out the app to the 100th user for free. And there are many other examples. This theory of marginal cost society is fronted by one of the leading economic and social theorists by the name of Jeremy Rifkin. Jeremy Rifkin is the author of several books, which you can go look for online. And one of his books is actually called The Zero Marginal Cost Society. Another book is the Third Industrial Revolution, where he talks about the effect of technology on modern society and all that. And one of the things that he says is that if you look at all the major breakthroughs in society, maybe in the last 200 years, there are three things that came together that led to a significant shift in the way we live and consume our goods and services. And these three things have to come together in the area of energy, in the area of communication or telecommunication, and in the area of transport, that is roads and all that. And he gives examples of historical happenings of this, and that when coal energy was combined with the Morse code, that is communication, and was combined with the railroad, we had a major explosion in the industrial economy, because three things came together: energy, in terms of coal, the railroad, and Morse code communication. Then the other example he gives is when electricity, together with the modern highway system and the telephone came together. A lot happened. There was a significant shift in the way people live and communicate. People usually think the internet is a big deal. The internet is not a big deal. The telephone was a big deal, because for the first time ever, you could talk to somebody in the other side of the country instantaneously in real time. Of course, the internet has more other things, but that was a significant shift in how people communicate. It was impossible. Yeah. So why are we now so focused on emerging technologies? This is because we are again back to the juncture where three things are coming together and combining to lead to a significantly different type of society that we live today. And of course, these are the energy technologies. There's a lot of focus on green energy, renewable energy, solar energy, and microgrids. And by microgrids, I mean, instead of a system where only one centralized organization, like in our case, the Kenya Power, is generating electricity for everyone to consume, everyone is able to generate electricity and feed it to the grid and get paid for it. So if I have solar panels in my house and I generate excess power, I should be able to feed that excess power into the grid to power somebody else's house or to power an office, and then get paid for that. So there is that, which will be heavily influenced by the Internet of Things, in a way that the Internet of Things will enable the interconnection of microgrids into one big grid. That is one area that, that is currently happening. Last year, a point reached where the microgrids in Germany produced so much power that it was excess for the grid. The German government actually paid people not to generate that power. You're being paid not to generate more power into the grid. That is one area. The other area he mentioned was in terms of the communication technologies and basically ICTs. We are at a point where we are about to witness a drastic shift in how we consume ICTs, and this is thanks to artificial intelligence. There's a famous author and also a famous AI researcher called Andrew Ng. Andrew Ng, if you search for him, you'll see one of the many of the things that he's done is a leading AI researcher, and he equates the advancement of AI to electricity. That the significance of artificial intelligence now can only be compared to the significance of the invention of electricity. And what do I mean by that? What he means by that is that artificial intelligence is going to significantly change how we live as human beings. The same way electricity significantly changed. Can you imagine a world without electricity today? It's impossible to imagine such a world. Where would we be? And in the same way, when electricity was invented, it was mostly to power, to light up streets and houses. Then later started powering motors and many other things. And as we speak today, nearly every modern gadget is powered by electricity. It was impossible to imagine that this would happen 100 years ago. It's the same thing for AI. We have not even scratched the surface as far as the adoption and use of AI in society is concerned. And that is why at this juncture of our existence, we are standing at a point where we are about to enter another phase. That issue, which is on the transportation front, there's a lot that is happening on the transportation front in terms of changing our transportation systems. A good example close home now is the ride-sharing apps, Uber, Bolt, Little. How have they changed transportation? They've changed it significantly to the point that you now do not need to own a car, that you can lease or share a car with other people. It's basically the sharing economy. Rifkin calls it the sharing economy, where people share resources without necessarily owning them. And the sharing economy is growing at a very fast rate. Today, there is Airbnb. That is an example of a sharing economy where I can lease out my extra room in my house or lease out my apartment to somebody. I can lease out my car to work as a Uber or whatever other taxi company I might fancy. And if I'm generating power, I can share my power with other people connected to the same grid. So Rifkin says that the sharing economy on the transport side, on the power generation side, and also in the area of ICT and artificial intelligence will drastically catapult society to the next phase. Now, what we need to realize is that it is not just the mere adoption of these technologies that will take us there. It is the advantages that they bring to us. And the biggest advantage, as we discussed, is the fact that most of these technologies are taking us towards a zero marginal cost society. And going back again to the examples I've used, it used to cost 1,000 bob, for example, to come from JKIA to my house, from the airport to my house. Right now, it costs half that. And why is that? Because of the sharing economy. Because in the olden days, the cab that would pick me from the airport, the yellow cabs, had to drop me at my place and then go back to the airport and wait for the next person. Currently, if I take an Uber from the airport and it drops me in my estate, that Uber can be used by my neighbor to take him to the airport or to take him to the hospital. That's a sharing economy. So because of that sharing economy, the marginal cost to provide a service has drastically reduced. And this will continue. 5 years ago, you would need at least 7,000 to 10,000 shillings to enjoy 4-star quality service in a good hotel in Nairobi per night. Today, with 2,000 shillings, you can get a similar service in somebody's leased apartment in an Airbnb. And that is going to accelerate as we go on and as we adopt AI. Another example of sharing is the one I've used where your phone's location data is being used by Google to generate the traffic situation in Nairobi. We are all sharing that. Of course, I can decide to switch off location tracking. I don't know whether that works, but I can decide to switch off location tracking on my phone and refuse to share with Google my movements, and therefore they'll be unable to accurately predict traffic patterns in Nairobi. So that's another example of a sharing economy. So we are at that point where the adoption of the sharing economy is driving us towards a zero marginal cost society. And what that will do is that it will significantly change the way we live and work. Yeah. And we are seeing that already happening, and it's only going to accelerate from here. So it is very important to understand the effects of emerging technologies is more towards making it nearly free to offer any service. Yeah. And it's happening. 5 years ago, you would need to pay for a conference room and meals and all that to conduct a training session, for example. Right now, we have somebody like Babu Owino conducting high school classes from his house for free. No one is paying. To an old school economist, that doesn't make sense. And that is why there's a focus on what is really happening. What is the impact of the sharing economy on our society today? And those are things that we are going to look at from this session as we go on. Any question up to there from anyone? Or is anyone lost so that we can clarify any point? Okay, so we can continue.
Just a query.
Yes.
Is Siri an example of AI?
Yes.
Siri
thank you.
And Bixby or something.
Yes, Siri is an example of application of AI. What Siri is that it's based on machine learning and natural language processing, where we use AI machine learning algorithms to train a system to be able to carry out informed conversations. And we'll discuss that in detail when we come to AI, but it's a very good example of AI. Another example is Amazon Alexa and Google Assistant. That's also another example. Thanks to Apple marketing, more people know about Siri than Google Assistant. But in terms of carrying out a conversation with Google Assistant, it is more intelligent than Siri if you try. And the other thing is that these technologies are leveraging AI in ways that we thought were impossible before. And a good example also on the same that you've raised is Google recently announced a chatbot, an AI-powered chatbot, which is basically like Siri, which would carry out open-ended conversations. It's very significant. And you can read about it. It's called Google Mina, MEENA, Google Mina. That's an example of adoption of AI in what we do. And there's a significant advantage of that, because Siri might seem like a toy right now, but what is happening in the background is that systems like, for example, Google are being now trained on various languages. Yeah, we now have the ability to converse with Google Assistant in very many languages right now. And in no time, you should have Google Assistant speaking in Kiswahili or in my mother tongue in Kikamba. And your question is, what is the significance of that? The fact that I can speak to my phone and ask it questions and use the internet by simply speaking to my phone in my mother tongue will significantly reduce the digital divide that is there currently, that is caused by lack of education. The reason why majority of the people are offline today is because they cannot read and write. But the good news is that they can speak. And the good news is that they can speak in their language more fluently. So if we can train AI systems to speak to us, so that I can be able to use the internet without necessarily the need for me to have an education or know how to use the system, then it will significantly improve. I don't know whether you can see me. Are you able to see me on the screen? I'd like to show you an example of what I'm talking about. So I'm holding my phone, and I'd like to find out from my phone, from my house where I am right now, if I can get to museum. I want to go to Museum Hill, let's say, for example. So let me start. Let me invoke the assistant on my phone and then ask it a question. If it's not clear, please let me know. Hey, Google. How is the traffic to Museum Hill roundabout? Hey, Google. How is the traffic to Museum Hill? Yeah, these things don't work when you're doing a live demo. Just a second. It's dragging its feet. Hey, Google. How is the traffic to Museum Hill roundabout?
I found these results.
Okay. Hey, Google. How's traffic to Sarit Center?
There's moderate traffic on the way to Sarit Center, so it should take 24 minutes.
Hey, Google. How is traffic to Jomo Kenyatta Airport?
There's light traffic on the way to Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, NBO, so it should take 24 minutes.
So as you've seen there, I have interacted with my phone by simply speaking to it. Was it clear? Did you guys hear the conversation?
Yes.
Yeah. So by simply talking to my phone, I was able to use the internet. Now I should be able to do the same thing in my mother tongue or in Kiswahili in the nearby future. And what that portends for us is a large number, in fact, nearly everyone on Earth will now be online by simply speaking to their devices. And that is one way in which AI can be used to, I think you're already seeing the picture of how AI can be used to achieve the SDGs. By the fact that we are leveraging on AI to train it using machine learning and let it learn various languages. I think Google now can do 90 languages. And they're adding them more onto their system. With time, I should be able to even converse with someone in Korea and in between Google, get a translation done in real time. So there's a lot happening in the background as far as that is concerned. I believe I've answered your question. Any other question? So we can continue. So I have another video which we'll discuss. Actually, it has Jeremy in it. Jeremy Rifkin will be talking about the zero marginal cost society. So let's watch it. It will put it into perspective better.
We're just beginning to glimpse the bare outlines of a new economic system entering onto the world stage. This is the first new economic system to emerge since the advent of capitalism and its antagonist socialism in the early 19th century. It's a remarkable historical event. It has long-term implications for every one of us, our children and our grandchildren. This new economic system is the collaborative commons. And what's triggering this shift to a new economic paradigm, a collaborative commons economic system, is something called zero marginal cost. Marginal costs are the cost of producing an additional unit of a good and service after your fixed costs are covered. The prospect of a technology revolution so extreme in its productivity that it could reduce those marginal costs to near zero across the value chain, making goods and services essentially priceless, nearly free, abundant, and beyond the market exchange economy. Then the zero marginal cost phenomena went on to invade the entire information goods industry. Millions of consumers became prosumers. And they began producing their own information goods. And if you take a look at the newspaper industry, magazines, book publishing, and the recording industry, they've never come back from zero marginal cost. Our economists have thought, well, we think there's a firewall here. And that is, even though more and more information goods are heading toward near zero marginal cost in virtual worlds, that they will not cross the firewall into the physical world of brick and mortar goods and services. No longer. What's happening now is that the communication internet is now expanding to an internet of things, a physical internet that allows us to go from the world of bits to the world of atoms. And when we have these three internets embedded in one system, a communication internet that's interacting continually with an energy internet and a transport and logistics internet in one platform, this Internet of Things allows us to begin moving near zero marginal cost from information goods to physical goods. By 2020, IBM says we'll be at 30 billion sensors, and a recent forecast study a few months ago says that by 2030, we will have 100 trillion sensors connecting everything with everyone in one global neural network. When we move from the internet to the Internet of Things, and we move from bits to atoms, we begin to see a completely new economic model that can get us to near zero marginal cost in the production and distribution of physical energy and physical products. Any one of millions of prosumers will be able to increase their productivity, dramatically reduce their marginal cost, and produce, consume, and share their own physical energy and manufactured goods with each other, just like we now do with information goods. The big wild card here is food and water and climate change. Because if we can't address climate change and we continue on this road, if we can't produce food and don't have access to water in a reliable fashion, everything I'm telling you is derailed. This new system is already in place in Europe. Let's take energy. The moment you put up a solar panel on your building or a wind turbine on site, even before you pay back the fixed cost, and that's usually 3 to 8 years, so it's not a long time. Immediately, though, your marginal costs are near zero because the sun off your roof is free. The wind off the side of your building is free. The geothermal heat coming up from under the ground is free. Your garbage converted in a bioconverter to energy in your kitchen, that's all free. And millions of small players have joined together in cooperatives, small, medium-sized businesses, homeowners. They're generating the new electricity. The Internet of Things is designed to be distributed, collaborative, peer-directed, and it scales to lateral economies of scale. Then let's take 3D printed products. We now have several 100,000 hobbyists, thousands of small and medium-sized startup companies that are printing out their own 3D printed products. And they're attaching their 3D printing operation, at least in Europe, into this new Internet of Things, this third industrial revolution. You go up on the internet, you download your software, it's all free, open source. Then you use for your feedstock recycled plastic, paper. We're even using sand and gravel and melting it down at near zero marginal cost. Then they're powering the 3D printing factory with green energy from their energy internet that's generated at near zero marginal cost. Then they're marketing their products on global website with very little advertising costs. You just pay a short fee, low marginal cost. And then we're just beginning to put in the logistics internet. You'll be able to power your vehicle to send your 3D printed product to market with your own green electricity from the energy internet. And the electric vehicles in a few years from now will be printed out. The first printed vehicle now exists in Canada. It runs on solar. We will have driverless vehicles that can move across a system at will, near zero marginal cost. This is a revolution. This is a revolution. This is a revolution. The question becomes this: if millions and hundreds of millions of people can begin to produce, consume, or share their own information goods, energy, and a lot of their manufactured goods at near zero marginal cost, making them nearly free and beyond the exchange model of the capitalist market, what kind of new economic system do we have to envision to organize the world, the one that I'm laying out here? It's the social commons. What's happening now is the social commons, which is a venerable institution that we rely on for educational institutions, our nonprofit, health services, daycare centers for our children, assisted living for the elderly, environmental organizations, cultural, sports, arts, it goes on and on. If they were eliminated and we just had the marketplace, we would not have much of a life on the planet. The social commons is ignored by economists because it doesn't create finance capital. It creates social capital, but it's a big revenue player. What's making this social commons now more relevant than any time in the past is this Internet of Things. Because the Internet of Things is a general purpose technology platform that's designed to be the technological soulmate of a social commons. The whole design is to be distributed, collaborative, scales laterally, not vertically, and it rewards collaboration across these lateral networks. It creates a sharing community. If millions and millions of people are producing and sharing their own energy and 3D printed products and information goods, they're going to need less income at zero marginal cost. They're still going to need employment. If the marketplace doesn't need them because we can produce the energy and the products, you know, in the marketplace with just high technology, where will you get the employment? In the social commons. The social commons creates social capital, human beings with the other human beings, creating communities, cultural, sports, arts, wellness, health, quality of life. Those are the more important employments. Making widgets is not as intellectually challenging and motivating to the human mind as it is trying to create a sense of human community, a sense of transcendence, a sense of finding meaning in the world. Last thought. We can get to nearly free energy. We're already there, nearly free goods and services, but without food and water, we don't survive. And we don't know if we can even feed people and provide water for people. How do we repopulate millions of people in the western part of the US in 30 years? So climate change is the elephant in the room. What's important to acknowledge here is that the third industrial revolution, this Internet of Things, allows us to move quickly out of fossil fuels and have millions of people begin to produce and share their own green energy. And this Internet of Things, because its entire purpose is to increase efficiencies, to reduce marginal costs, it means it shows us how to use less resources more effectively. So we don't put a big burden on the planet that we live in. So we have young people here not only sharing information goods and energy now in 3D printed products, but so we have car sharing and bike sharing, and now we're sharing apartments and homes and clothes and tools and toys. So we have a generation that's beginning to believe it's not about ownership, it's access. And if more people share what they have, less has to be produced. It does have a negative impact on GDP, but it has a positive impact on quality of life, and that's the way to measure a good economy. It isn't just technology. What it does is it democratizes the economy. And hopefully you'll be in a world in 2050 that won't be the 1% or the 99%. It'll be a shared economy, a sustainable, good quality of life where no one's left behind. Now, is it utopia? No. We need to change the human narrative. We need a new story for the human race to go with the technology. We have to move from geopolitics to biosphere consciousness in one generation. Everything we do intimately impacts some other human, some other ecosystem, some other species on this earth. We got a young generation here that's beginning to see we live in one indivisible community, the biosphere. So I'm guardedly hopeful. And if we can dramatically increase efficiencies, reduce our marginal costs, and that means using less resources more effectively and taking a less burden on the planet, we may get to a better world by mid-century. You need to help lead this so we have a chance of rehealing the planet and creating a future for our children.
That was a very good video, basically highlighting what I'd mentioned before. But then the question is isn't this too far-fetched? My answer is no. Let me give you an example. When he mentioned that climate change is one of the biggest issues we need to be aware of, and that these technologies are going to make us get wind of fossil fuels faster. I just want to use a recent example in Nairobi. We had about 2 months ago, we had a partial lockdown where many companies were asking their staff to work from home. Within 2 weeks, everyone was sharing photos online of how they can see Mount Kenya from Westlands or Mount Kilimanjaro from Langata. 2 weeks of people not driving around cleared the air. Now, what people are calling the new normal, like us having online classes, we would have all fueled our cars to go to a conference session, a hotel or a conference center, and had a session there in an air-conditioned room and consume a lot of energy just to do this session. But with the use of technologies and adoption of technologies, we can take care of the environment as is shared there. Another example is still on the lockdown that we've had. I'm using that because it's a more recent example. We are now seeing talented people, artists, comedians, DJs, being able to live stream their services or their whatever they do straight from their houses. 5 years ago, you needed a contract with a TV station for you to be a famous comedian in Kenya. A good example is Churchill. Yeah. Today, there are so many upcoming comedians who are using YouTube, who are using Facebook, who are using all forms of social media and Instagram to reach their audiences directly, straight from their houses. No need for shows in every part of Nairobi or Kenya just to make people laugh. You can do it straight from your house using technology. And that is what Rifkin talks about in terms of the new generation has realized and is quickly leveraging these technologies. Another example is how these technologies are bringing social justice. Remember, one of the SDGs was ensuring equitable justice to all. Currently, there are riots in the US, and you all know about the story. We won't discuss it here, but somebody was mishandled by the police and ended up dying, which is unfortunate. But there's a lot of outrage now and of recent times. Why? It's all because of technology. Now, everyone who has a mobile phone and a social media account is a broadcaster. Everyone. You can broadcast live from anywhere where there's internet to the entire world. And you can be able to capture some of these injustices on the spot and record them or stream them live. But these killings have been happening since time immemorial. It's only now that when people are being empowered, the traditional media was silent on it. It's only now that people are being empowered with technology, cheaper internet, yeah, faster internet, highly capable computing devices, the cloud, and all that is improving social justice in a way that we never thought impossible. Even in Kenya, we've seen videos where people record their altercations with the police or where they feel they're being unfairly treated. And these have been used and are continuing to be admissible now in courts. And as we move towards that direction, what we are seeing is that the application of technology in society is helping to address majority of the issues that we are already facing. And this is just what has happened up to now. Where we are standing currently and where we are about to go is a significantly bigger place than we can ever imagine because of the emerging technologies that, that we discuss. Now, I've given examples that zero marginal cost will ultimately is the ultimate outcome of this emerging or frontier technologies. And an example is online schooling like this, which is working towards achieving SDG 4 and 5, ride and house sharing, Airbnb, Uber, Taxify, Bolt now, SDG 11, 12, and 13, working from home, which is happening for many people, including some of you and me. SDG 1, 8, 12, and 13. All that is powered by the internet and the cloud and AI and all the systems. Ride-sharing apps, SDG 8, 11, and 12. That's AI, that's IoT in application. Cloud computing services, that's SDG 8 and 9. So that's where we are. And that is the link between these emerging technologies and how we can achieve some of these goals that are listed. Now, I know we are a bit out of time. I'd like to rush a bit. And the UN Department for Economic and Social Affairs, or UNDESA, is what provides an interface between what we need to achieve and what nations need to do. Yeah. And what they do that by fostering cooperation and sustainable development for all. And what guides this organization is the Agenda 2030, which is the basis of the Sustainable Development Goals. And there was a report that was released in 2018 by the World Economic Forum, which is titled the World Economic and Social Survey report for 2018. And one of the things of the highlights is a big document. You can look for it online and read. But the highlights from what I gathered from that document is that it says that frontier technologies have a huge potential to make sustainable development a reality, improving people's lives and promoting prosperity and protecting the planet, as we've just seen using the examples that I've shared. And this rapid change in adoption of this technology introduces very many policy challenges. And I've given an example. For example, what should be the policy around 3D printing of guns? Or what should be the policy around artificial intelligence and data privacy and IoT? Yeah. So those are the issues that arise, and those are the issues that need to be addressed now early enough. And as I've given an example on the mobile technology sector, when Kenya and some of the countries adopted mobile communication, there were no clear policy frameworks around it in as far as data protection and privacy is concerned. Some people argue that regulation should follow innovation and not the other way around, which is true. But that only assumes that there is ample time for regulation to catch up. As you've seen on the mobile sector, that wasn't the case. And because technology is accelerating, when it comes to adopting these new emerging technologies, I do not think we have time to sit and wait and see how it plays out. It might be too late. So there is need for these challenges to be addressed by global bodies, the UN, the International Telecommunication Union, regulatory bodies within each countries, to ensure that these policies, or a framework at least, is in place. That is actually one of my focus areas in my postgraduate research, in terms of working towards ensuring that have a policy framework for the Internet of Things in the country. And this report also says that the frontier technologies will present us with the new moral and ethical dilemmas that have to be addressed. Yeah, because now we are moving our agency as human beings to systems. Like if you're in a driverless car, it's a car that is making decisions, not you. So some of these moral issues that arise when we make decisions as human beings are going to be transferred to machines. And when that happens, the question is, what do we do to ensure that we remain morally upright or ethically acceptable in society, even as we adopt these technologies? There's an example which is usually commonly shared in most discourses on morality and technology, of the trolley problem. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. You can look for it, the trolley problem. And that trolley problem has been modified to depict the realities of modern technologies. And maybe I can share with you a video on that problem. Let me skip this slide first. And we're going to see in a video of how, even as we adopt these emerging technologies for our daily use, what are the ethical issues that need to be addressed? These ethical issues might emanate from a moral perspective or from a legal perspective. And it's very important that even as we design these systems, we are at the forefront of ensuring that we are designing systems that are acceptable to us and that will make decisions the way we would normally do. So let's watch.
This is a thought experiment. Let's say at some point in the not-so-distant future, you're barreling down the highway in your self-driving car, and you find yourself boxed in on all sides by other cars. Suddenly, a large, heavy object falls off the truck in front of you. Your car can't stop in time to avoid the collision, so it needs to make a decision. Go straight and hit the object, swerve left into an SUV, or swerve right into a motorcycle. Should it prioritize your safety by hitting the motorcycle, minimize danger to others by not swerving, even if it means hitting the large object and sacrificing your life, or take the middle ground by hitting the SUV, which has a high passenger safety rating? So what should the self-driving car do? If we were driving that boxed-in car in manual mode, whichever way we'd react would be understood as just that, a reaction, not a deliberate decision. It would be an instinctual, panicked move with no forethought or malice. But if a programmer were to instruct the car to make the same move, given conditions it may sense in the future, well, that looks more like premeditated homicide. Now, to be fair, self-driving cars are predicted to dramatically reduce traffic accidents and fatalities by removing human error from the driving equation. Plus, there may be all sorts of other benefits: eased road congestion, decreased harmful emissions, and minimized unproductive and stressful driving time. But accidents can and will still happen, and when they do, their outcomes may be determined months or years in advance by programmers or policymakers. And they'll have some difficult decisions to make. It's tempting to offer up general decision-making principles like minimize harm, but even that quickly leads to morally murky decisions. For example, let's say we have the same initial setup, but now there's a motorcyclist wearing a helmet to your left and another one without a helmet to your right. Which one should your robot car crash into? If you say the biker with the helmet because she's more likely to survive, then aren't you penalizing the responsible motorist? If instead you say the biker without the helmet because he's acting irresponsibly, then you've gone way beyond the initial design principle about minimizing harm, and the robot car is now meting out street justice. The ethical considerations get more complicated here. In both of our scenarios, the underlying design is functioning as a targeting algorithm of sorts. In other words, it's systematically favoring or discriminating against a certain type of object to crash into. and the owners of the target vehicles will suffer the negative consequences of this algorithm through no fault of their own. Our new technologies are opening up many other novel ethical dilemmas. For instance, if you had to choose between a car that would always save as many lives as possible in an accident, or one that would save you at any cost, which would you buy? What happens if the cars start analyzing and factoring in the passengers of the cars and the particulars of their lives? Could it be the case that a random decision is still better than a predetermined one designed to minimize harm? And who should be making all of these decisions anyhow? Programmers? Companies? Governments? Reality may not play out exactly like our thought experiments, but that's not the point. They're designed to isolate and stress test our intuitions on ethics, just like science experiments do for the physical world. Spotting these moral hairpin turns now will help us maneuver the unfamiliar road of technology ethics and allow us to cruise confidently and conscientiously into our brave new future.
So I think that video basically has displayed to us that it's not just a matter of adopting these technologies, but making sure that we adopt them in a manner that will be beneficial to us. Another example which I need to share is in the area of offline bias reinforcement. And we've seen this in some AI systems where right now, if you look at most AI systems that I use, they are somehow biased towards the minorities, yeah, the poor, the Black, and so on and so forth. So this offline bias is currently being built into these systems. And it's because we are simply copying what is offline to an online system. And that has many consequences in as far as AI and the future is concerned. A good example is when there was an AI system that had been developed in the US for justice, for giving out sentences in court based on the crime committed. What they discovered was that this system was giving harsher sentences to Blacks who committed the same crime as whites. And why was that? It's because the AI system had been designed and trained and was trained on biased data. The biased data that is everywhere, that Blacks are most likely to be criminals. I'm not saying that's the truth, but I'm just saying that's the data that's out there. Or people who live in a certain neighborhood are most likely to be jobless or something, or something like that, or less educated. So those biases are being built into these systems, and we need to be very careful even now. And how do we make sure that those biases are not propagated into the future, into, for example, AI decision-making systems, as we've seen. In that example we've seen, we are using two cars, yeah? But it could be a bias of anything. It could be maybe our tribal biases have been built into your driverless car to the point that if you're on the road and the car has to make that decision that we saw there, look, this guy on the left is from one side of this country that I don't fancy, and this guy is actually from my tribe. So the car will make a decision based on a tribal bias. So those are the things that regulators and policymakers need to address at the moment, that even as we adopt driverless cars, what do we need to ensure that, or put in place to ensure that these systems work for us and are beneficial to us, and they work towards achieving the SDGs. Now, one advantage of the frontier technologies or the emerging technologies, that they can help us leapfrog and achieve SDGs much faster. The same way the mobile phone helped us leapfrog communications, where you did not need to first own a landline phone and then move to the mobile phone. Majority of the people moved straight into a smartphone without ever having owned even a feature phone. So that is what is called leapfrogging. That our backwardness is actually an advantage in a way, especially in a country like ours, because we do not have to go through the entire technology adoption process like other countries have gone through. All you need to do is leapfrog and move straight into the new technologies and achieve the SDGs. Yeah. Another example is people who are using solar directly. They do not need to be connected to the grid. They're leapfrogging straight into solar power. Worth mentioning actually is two SDGs, which are very critical in helping us leapfrog. The SDG that touches on education, which is SDG 4, and the one that touches on infrastructure that provide these services. It is very important that these SDGs are achieved in earnest. And that is why there's a lot of focus on many countries on education and infrastructure as a basis, in addition to health and all that. So even as we talk about the SDGs, it does not mean that all of them are applied at the same time, all the 17 of them at once. There are others that will come before others. For example, infrastructure must come before we talk about 4G or 5G connectivity. We cannot talk about using 5G to power IoT when you do not have the fiber cables on the ground or the base stations set up everywhere and power to power those devices. Yeah. So maybe as a summary, I'd like us to summarize and discuss what we've covered so far. We have defined what emerging technologies are, and also said that they can also be referred to as frontier technologies, and both terms mean the same thing, yeah? And that these technologies span across the entire science and technology sectors we've seen in biomedicine and in biotechnology and all that. But our focus here, of course, is heavily leaning towards ICT. And then that emerging technologies are very attractive because they will lower the marginal cost to do something. Right now, if a musician in Nairobi releases a new song, like Sauti Sol, for example, last week released an album, they did not need to sell a single CD in the streets or in music shops. It was all online, on YouTube, on all the other media streaming platforms, and the marginal cost of me viewing their video or downloading their song is zero to them. They do not need to do anything else for me to access their music other than just placing it online. That amount of leverage and that amount of diminishing of marginal costs is what will take us far. Right now, another example is 10 years ago, you needed an outside broadcasting van. Yeah, those big vans with the antennas on top for live transmission, emblazoned with the company, the broadcasting station's logo, KBC. Those big lorries you used to see at Nyayo Stadium during live events. Now all you need is a mobile phone and an internet connection. Zero. It costs nearly zero to be a broadcaster to the entire world, not even to Nairobi or Kenya. You can broadcast from your Facebook Live or YouTube Live to anyone in the world. So there are dangers there that come with that. For example, in New Zealand, when there was that mass shooting in the mosque, the terrorists used Facebook Live to stream that terror act, that act of terror. So then regulatory and moral and legal questions come into play. Should we give all this power to the end users? And if we do, what are the repercussions and how do we manage that? And that incident in New Zealand generated a lot of debate on the amount of power technology is giving the ordinary person in the street to talk to anyone and tell them anything from anywhere. Another example is, I was actually discussing in the morning with my daughter, is Trump. Trump has been able to bypass the entire traditional news delivery chain of traditional media houses and go straight to his supporters using Twitter. Straight from his phone, he can talk to his diehard fans everywhere. Yeah. So what are the dangers of that? What are the dangers of having a president whose utterances can have significant consequences on people's lives and maybe even start wars? What are the dangers of giving that level of access or power to an individual by use of technology? When Twitter, last week, Batuan marked one of Trump's tweets as a possible fake news, Trump immediately called for the repeal of Section 230, which of course will give the US power to regulate social media companies. So again, that statement of I am going to regulate social media companies was issued by him directly on a social media platform, directly to his supporters. Yeah. The question is, what is the role of technology in ensuring that society thrives and doesn't crash and burn, as some cases are trying to show us? So these are things that we need to look at. And emerging technologies will provide us that, and they'll also provide us with massive leverage on the economic activities that we do. And then the other thing is that these emerging technologies are interlinked. And by this, I mean that IoT, for example, cannot exist independently without the cloud or serverless architectures. It cannot exist independently without AI. It cannot exist independently without the ability to do large and fast computations on big data and to analyze big data very fast. Because remember, IoT collects a lot of data, and that is one of the biggest challenges with IoT, as we'll see later, that there's too much data being collected and it needs to be processed instantly. So those are the things that, that's what I mean by saying that these technologies are interlinked and that one needs the other to function, and that we need to look at these emerging technologies from a holistic point of view. Let's not look at IoT as an independent subject. In the background of IoT, there is 5G, which is coming, because 5G is predominantly significant because of Internet of Things. It's not about faster internet. 4G, if it's about fast internet, then 4G is already doing that and even more, yeah? But 5G is geared towards the Internet of Things. Artificial intelligence is being used currently to analyze data from Internet of Things. Big data analytics on the cloud, which is also an emerging technology, are now possible. It was impossible to do the computations that people are doing on the cloud right now using in-house resources. But because now I can start a company and host very powerful servers on the cloud, I'm able to offer IoT services to my customers because the cost of computing and analyzing that data is close to zero, thanks to the economies of scale that the cloud presents. So those are things that we've discussed, and I think we will end there, the session for today. And today's session was mainly an introduction to the SDGs and how we can use emerging technologies to achieve these SDGs. And in the next sessions, over the next weeks, we are going to cover individual technologies. We'll start tomorrow with the cloud and serverless architectures, and how the cloud and serverless architectures can be leveraged or used to help us achieve the SDGs. So I'll end the session there, and I invite questions or any clarification that is needed from anyone. The floor is open. You can just unmute yourself and ask the question kindly.
Hi, Tom. This is Haji.
Yes, Haji.
No, mine is not on the content. It's about These slides, do you get them daily to go them through to familiarize further? I know you have discussed, you have talked more than what we saw on the slides.
Yes, yes. So
do we get them
we'll have the slides, and we'll also have a recorded session, which will be
Okay.
available online.
Okay, thank you.
Yes,
Thank
yes. Next question.
Now, again, Haji again.
Yes, Haji.
The rest we are quiet. The regulatory issues, we've said, I think there are challenges with new or emerging technologies, IoT, whatever we'll discuss within
Yes.
the next 2 weeks.
Yes.
I think we did, as you go, we are in the regulatory entity.
Yes.
We need to hear, obviously, we are experienced in the technology side, regulatory, benchmarking. We need to hear regulatory solutions once in a while.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
So
yeah, thank you.
Okay, sorry for cutting you short. As we discuss these technologies as we go on, we'll be touching on the issues of regulation and policy around them. A good example is tomorrow when you're discussing about cloud. Yeah. Yes, the cloud is exciting, and there are economies of scale that people can leverage on, and so on and so forth. But when you go to a bank and tell them, hey, we have this product that we want you to move to the cloud, and these are the benefits. When they look at their licensing requirements, one of the requirements is that their banking customer data should not leave the country. It should be hosted within the country. So it should be in a data center within Kenya. Yeah. So the question is then, how do we ensure that our regulation catches up with this new development? Because every other bank now would find immense benefits moving to the cloud than hosting their systems in-house. But the law is a bit slow on that area because the central bank still tells them your data must be processed within the country, you cannot leave the country. So those are the regulatory aspects we need to look at and see those challenges that are being brought about by these technologies. How do we overcome them using the technology or changing the regulation? In the example that I've given, one way we can overcome the technology, overcome that challenge by use of technology is by having locally available cloud instances. So that, because when people talk of the cloud, they often refer to the cloud hosted on data centers outside Africa, basically. Yeah. But with technologies like Microsoft Azure Stack, you can be able to have the cloud, but locally, not out there. So that already, by doing that, you've already met that legal requirement of having your data being processed locally. On the regulatory side, you might decide this law is actually archaic. This law made sense 10 years ago, but today it doesn't make sense. And of course, it doesn't make sense because every other organization is moving to the cloud. The other day, towards the end of last year, Microsoft gave, the Pentagon, which is the military arm of the US, gave Microsoft a $10 billion tender to supply them with cloud services. So the Pentagon itself is moving from in-house servers to the cloud powered by Microsoft Azure. Earlier on, I'd mentioned that the CIA is already on the Amazon cloud, and many other organizations are embracing the cloud. So the question is, from a regulatory point of view, what do we need to do to make sure that we not only play catch up, but we also prepared for these emerging technologies as they come? Any other question? I believe I've answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
The floor is still open. If there's any question or comment or clarification that you needed on anything that I've discussed. So I think we can stop there. If there are no more questions, maybe I like to return the mic, for lack of a better word, to Stephen.
Okay, Tom, thank you very much. Indeed, I'm very excited about that very mind-provoking presentation. And I'm sure we've all learned something. And if we have not, we've been reminded about something. That was very good. Thank you very much, Tom, for that presentation.
Karibu sana. So let's meet tomorrow, 10:30
I also would like to thank, sorry.
No, I'm
okay,
done.
Tom, I think your mic is muted.
It's not muted.
So again, I would like also to thank the participants for attending. Of course, without you, you cannot have this class. So again, thank you very much. The other thing is to remind you that you need to visit our social, not our e-learning platform, so that you